Welcome everyone. This is the podcast series of Faculty of Business and Economics, University of Pécs. And today I have two special guests here. Let me introduce you Esteban Lafuente, who is professor of business at the Costa Rica Institute of Technology. And also he's the honorary doctor of University of Pécs. Esteban, welcome, and thank you for accepting the invitation.
Good morning, Tamas. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And our other guest is Professor László Szerb, who is the professor of entrepreneurship at University of Pécs, Faculty of Business and Economics, and also member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Welcome, László. Thanks for accepting the invitation today.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody.
Today we are going to talk about a very interesting and important subject, which is entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And our guests are experts and researchers on this field. So I think that we can have a very interesting and fruitful discussion with a lot of interesting questions. So let's start. So both of you have been researching entrepreneurship for many years. As a starter, I would just like to ask you to answer in one simple sentence that what is the one question, the simple question about entrepreneurship that fascinates you the most, which drove you to this specific field of study?
Well, maybe something that is really under research, but really captures most attention today is why isomorphic policy is usually the common recipe when everybody knows that isomorphic is not exactly efficient. It's totally the opposite. Okay, in a way, entrepreneurs do not work in a vacuum. They don't work in a vacuum. So isomorphic policy is probably the most inefficient way to approach entrepreneurship. But everybody continues to approach it using isomorphic measures. That fascinates me is why we're still making the same mistake instead of customizing the recipes for different types of entrepreneurs. Even within the territory, different entrepreneurs need or have different needs. That is the real question. What do they need in reality to materialize what they call their ideas and I call their ambitions?
Asking a question is a difficult question, I would say. So I would go back to what is the specialty of the entrepreneurship research. And, economics examines a wide range of things. And one of the important field of economics is examining the macro conditions. The other is examining the firms or the businesses. And the specialty of entrepreneurship is the focus on the individual. So basically the core question of entrepreneurship, how and why people are becoming entrepreneurs. So that, I think, is still a continuous type of questions, and we add further and further questions to be able to answer or to at least partially answer this kind of questions. So what are the factors that influence entrepreneurs to be there? So there are some personal factors and there are some kind of external factors. So that's that most fascinates me.
Okay, thank you very much. So László, you mentioned the macro conditions. So I would like to turn a little bit to this direction. So it is like a common sense that that entrepreneurship is good for the economy. It promotes economic growth. So that's something we hear from popular press and everyday news. So from a research perspective, like really going down into the details of entrepreneurship, what can you say? How accurate this statement really is?
That's one of the major questions that we have tried to answer, or at least over the last 20 years. And that goes back again, how we define entrepreneurship. And, entrepreneurship belongs to the humanities. So it means that for the same kind of phenomenon, we have various type of definitions or concepts. So again, it depends on how we define entrepreneurship. Many of them define something like as being a self-employed or not being employed for somebody else. But we know that this kind of businesses are more self-employed businesses, very marginal newness to the others. So when we are going deeply and trying to make difference what is between entrepreneurship and other type of self-employment, we would add that we need some kind of newness, yeah, and some kind of differences. Now again, how we define the newness and differences? There are several ways, and the different answers what we are getting, it depends on what do we know about the effect of entrepreneurship, whether it increases growth, whether it increases well-being, whether it increases profit, or increases just happiness of the people. So again, the answer to this kind of questions is something like various type of entrepreneurship measures exist, and especially if we examine the output of entrepreneurship, that is an entrepreneurial activity. And we know there are different kind of businesses. And at the start, one starts as a self-employment, one would be something like the future Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, or Elon Musk, who knows, yeah? But they are definitely different. So in the entrepreneurship research, we are trying to capture the top of this kind of results of this entrepreneurial activity, the really high impact type of businesses. And we differentiate from the classical type of businesses, especially if we mix it with many of the small businesses. That's not a problem, but many small businesses, and the smaller the business, the less efficient it is. So when somebody wants to be something like a real entrepreneur, has to add something to this kind of just being a self-employed or working for himself or herself.
Esteban, what is your opinion?
That is correct. There are two debates. Back to Laszlo's issue, there are two debates. The definitional issue, the definitional debate, and the economic debate. The definitional debate is exactly what László was presenting. I mean, what is entrepreneurship? What exactly we try to understand the hypothetical contribution of these entrepreneurs to the society. And the economic debate is, when can we start deciding that somebody's contributing to the economy? Okay, the contribution of entrepreneurs is not necessarily as in any import-output relationship. The contribution is not necessarily measuring money. Okay, we need a more holistic approach. No, you mentioned happiness, László. I mean, happiness or well-being, many others. No, but you have the purely economic measure and the network measure. In artificial ecosystems like the ones where we are living in the city, maybe sometimes a very small business with reduced economic contribution can have a greater contribution in terms of networkness. Making people busy. If you keep people busy, is usually a good measure of how much these entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs or incumbent entrepreneurs contribute to the society. Maybe a 3 people business keeps busy 10 other businesses, or a 50 people business keeps nobody busy. So what is the contribution? No, this is the idea. It's not about necessarily quantity, but the quality of the activity too. The quality of the activity is what counts. Okay, it's relatively useless to be 20 hours working on something if your contribution is less than marginal. Okay, it's not like counting hours. It's making your hours count. Okay, this is why technological businesses have these scalability capacities. Okay, or businesses in knowledge-intensive sectors, they're usually perceived as more influential in the society or contributing more to society than non-knowledge intensive businesses. Okay, so it's the definitional debate is important, the economic debate is important, and in the economic debate it's more about the type of contribution, networkness, economic activity. These elements interact. There is no single solution, but in the interaction between the elements is when we can understand how to create a rank of contribution of these entrepreneurs to the society in general terms.
In recent years, we had a lot of discussion about that economic growth is not the ultimate goal why we are designing and managing and maintaining our economic systems. And we talk much more about sustainability, the well-being, and especially inequalities in the society. So what do you think? So can entrepreneurship naturally contribute to these goals beyond pure economic growth? Is it a natural part of entrepreneurship, or this is something where we expect now too much from entrepreneurship if we also put that goal on the shoulders of entrepreneurs?
Too demanding to the people, too demanding. We are too demanding to entrepreneurs. These are usually the consequence of different externalities. Now when we are focusing on sustainability, digitalization, preservation of the qualities of the city, well-being, all these non-economic goals, this is the difference, non-economic versus economic goals. In the non-economic side, usually society filters out businesses. It started as a buzzword, now it's becoming trend, and I hope it consolidates in the near future. But definitely sustainable organizations, or at least organizations that try to be more sustainable, generate externalities that others perceived. And this is where the society filters out. It creates like a filter where organizations that don't really pursue any sustainable goals or don't really pursue any sustainable objectives are removed from the market preferences set, and organizations with more sustainable approach tend to win followers, okay? They definitely contribute. The problem is what they do today can be seen or can be measured 5 years ahead. This is the challenge now. Everybody wants immediate outcomes, and that is obviously not possible. To really observe economic profit, you can wait a year. To really observe the sustainability impact, you need 3 years, 5 years to see in any observable way. And that is the challenge for these people, to make people understand, to make the rest of society understand that what they're doing today is going to have an impact tomorrow. That is the real deal in this case. But yes.
Yeah, let me approach this question in a little bit different way. Yeah, it's I read not late, but a long time ago. It was a small book of Arthur Okun, and that was the title was Equity and Efficiency, and this was very nicely written. If you have more than one goals, that probably have something like a negative effect. So if you want more equity, that will cost you in terms of efficiency. And I think that is true also here. So if we have just one goal that can be fulfilled, yeah, but at the cost of the others, yeah. So it's something like this. So where the production economists, yeah, they have something like 3 goals, but you can only hold 2, and the 3 will be something like you cannot hold all 3. So, but turning to the entrepreneurship research, this kind of, especially the equities as a social entrepreneurship concept is not a new concept. Like it's more than 20 years old. So that examining something like the equity type of effect of entrepreneurship is not new. Now it's coming more, yeah, and more measurement that's going to the well-being part, the happiness part. So something like moving along, this is only from the financial type of measurements. And let me give you another twist. We are in the middle of this kind of digital technology-led revolution. And like revolutions in the previous industrial revolutions, yeah, there were something like breakthrough revolutions. They always had something like there were some kind of extremely rich guys emerged there. And what we can see there is exactly the same. Yeah, the richest 5% could buy out a whole continent, maybe Africa. Yeah, so and this kind of thing could hurt people. So what can we see over the last years? As far as I can see, there is an increasing public support of the entrepreneurial careers. Yeah, and that's also turned us to pay more attention for that one. And also this kind of digital technology endangers existing jobs. And so we have to do something with it. So we cannot just focus on let Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk do whatever they do. They are smart guys and do nice things, and that doesn't cost something like to the taxpayers, but it has something like for the whole society, some kind of negative effect that we need to handle and we need to examine. And we lack this kind of examination, or we are just in the early beginning of this kind of examination.
Thank you for this very illuminating. Sorry, Esteban.
No, maybe there is something to put on the table to complement what László just said. It is true. There are positive externalities, as I said before, but also negative externalities. Both can only be measured just in time. There is in this digital wave something that is emerging very, very strongly, that I love the concept, and is the digital privacy. Not the digital rights that we usually don't have online, no? But I mean the preservation of our digital rights when we transmit messages, not through social media or digital media, but using digital instruments, including chips. No, all that information is subject to, not to manipulation, obviously not, but obviously subject to or it can be used to pursue marketing or economic purposes. Imagine a chip that is implanted in your head just to track and pay like a credit card. No, it already exists, this technology. Yeah, but that technology can also be put into your brain. That is the thing. So people with problems, people with some disabilities, can use a computer now. Yeah, but at the same time, those chips facilitate that you can receive messages, marketing messages, ideology messages, etc. So we are invading that person's digital privacy through digital mechanisms. That is part of the externalities that we're not really paying attention to. The positive externality is very nice to imagine all these benefits now of Zuckerberg, Elon, etc. But the negative externalities are also there, and sometimes they are underrated because we overrate the seemingly apparently good externalities. For most entrepreneurs, it also matters. In the digital wave, we observe unconnected people had problems, especially in the pandemic. We discovered this. Unconnected people were facing severe problems to access goods, to access suppliers, to access markets. Now the digital is the common, is the day-to-day, is the day-to-day, and somebody who is not connected is basically out of the market. But 10 years ago, that was a totally different picture, okay? And this is why all these externalities, positive and negative, should be balanced at some point. That is important to remember. There are both types of externalities.
Absolutely agree, and thanks for raising up externalities, because when talking about externalities, what I always have in my mind is that practically our actions, economic decisions, entrepreneurship, if you like, is never isolated, and it's never restricted to just pure business transactions, like market-based business transactions, but it always has some broader context which affects these transactions, and the transactions themselves affect the broader context. And I believe that the main idea of entrepreneurial ecosystem is related to this realization, or this idea that entrepreneurship is never isolated. It's embedded in a complex social and economic system of different actions and transactions. You have been doing research in entrepreneurial ecosystems for a long while now, so I'm sure that you can prove me right or wrong in this. And I would also like to ask you that how do you see this entrepreneurial ecosystem paradigm or literature, how you want to call it, whether it's a shift in understanding entrepreneurship, or it's just like repackaging of formerly existing research ideas and research tracks?
That's an interesting thing, and it depends on how you view it. So it's the ecosystem idea, the using ecosystem in business or economics, that's not new. Yeah, what is relatively new is using in entrepreneurship, and it goes back to probably to 2010s when Daniel Eisenberg wrote a famous paper about it. That was basically the real starting, the emergence of this kind of ecosystem thinking. And what brought us this kind of ecosystem thinking? So it's there were some kind of isolated researches, yeah, and especially when we try to examine what effect entrepreneurship, there were independently examined whether this is a good regulation, whether good institutions, whether it's good, education or finance or whatever it is. And this kind of researches examine something like in economics, right, based on the ceteris paribus. We know that we examine only the effect of one thing and keep all the others unchanged. Yeah, but in an ecosystem, everything depends on everything, and that was one of the things to bring into this kind of not new idea, but in a different context into entrepreneurship. Yeah, that this kind of factors exist not in isolation, but in a system. And if you change one thing, that does have an effect, not just the output of entrepreneurship, that is the entrepreneurial activity, but on the other factors also. So we try to examine and understand what are these factors, and that was the first question. So what are these factors? And especially Daniel Eisenberg identified, I think, hundreds of this kind of thing. And that goes to the others. If we have hundreds of factors and examining different countries or cities or regions, and what can we recognize? That all them different, yeah? And if you go to more and more details, it's clear up that all unique, yeah? So, and that's going back to Esteban's thought, yeah? That this kind of general type of policy, for example, increase the number of startups or whatever it is that's something like an obsolete program here, yeah? If you have different kind of ecosystems, yeah? So it's just going to the biology ecosystem, yeah, if you have an Arctic ecosystem and you try to raise a tropical tree there, that probably would be very dangerous. And sometimes I have the feeling that politicians are doing something like this, yeah, so it's trying to, in a completely different environment, using a policy tool that is not appropriate for this kind of thing. So that was the other the type of thinking, that the uniqueness of this kind of ecosystems, yeah, and what are the common things at a certain level that we can examine in this kind of ecosystem. So what was the conclusion of that one? If ecosystems are different, then this kind of uniform policy doesn't work, and we need something like tailor-made policies, yeah, so adjusted policies for that one. And there is very limited that you can learn from others, and you should be very careful trying to adopt, or that was in the 1980s, 1990s, yeah, recreate the Silicon Valley, yeah, and all of this were failed, yeah. And what we can also know, that different kind of configurational ecosystems can be equally good. Yeah, so we don't have just one good ecosystem that we need to copy, but there are several ways to make good ecosystems.
Yeah, that is true. That different ecosystems yield the same outcome. If you think about it for a moment, guys, more directly or more indirectly, since we started, we'll be talking about ecosystems. Okay? Once we discover that entrepreneurs do not act in isolation, as you said, Tamas, or once we recognize that entrepreneurs interact with different agents, market agents at different levels, that it's a simplistic way to perceive an ecosystem. We're lucky that we have technology to partially understand how an ecosystem works, only partially. It's obviously impossible to see or to measure all the connections that exist in a market. But one thing we know, the contribution or the analysis of any entrepreneurial activity within an ecosystem is incomplete, is flawed, if we ignore the concept of ecosystem. This is why externalities count. This is why the growth entrepreneurship relationship count. This is why the role of digital technologies or digitalization processes are so important. Okay, and this is why we need different measures for different components of the ecosystem, as we have in natural ecosystems. No, we measure the soil, the different types of trees, the different type of animals using different, let's say, technologies or different measurements. Here is the same. If you study the networks of these entrepreneurs, we need certain technology. If we want to measure the infrastructure supporting those connections, okay, we need a different technology. And the magic or the catch is to combine them efficiently to get a sort of general picture of what is going on within this ecosystem, to see whether this configuration that can be more efficient or less efficient is producing something that is potentially positive or something that is not potentially positive, sterile, or even negative. There are examples of negative impacts of entrepreneurial activity in the economy, okay? When they turn the economy to a sort of stagnation process and devolution of the economic activity, okay? Especially in areas where mining or primary extractives are gaining weight, okay? They are misplacing technological activities and going back to the mine, and that is super inefficient, for example, okay? Not only for ecological, but also for economic activity. Concerning the growth, that was the origin of the entire question. Growth is terrible for two things. Maybe people forget about this from an economic view. Every time we measure growth, we need to remember that any economic growth measure includes all the positive things that are happening in the economy, but also all the bad things that are happening in the economy, funerales, okay? So the consequences of the bad things that happens in society also go to the GDP, and they produce growth for some sectors. Obviously, they also create, again, negative externalities that sometimes are not captured in the GDP, okay? That's why growth is not the ultimate goal. Growth is just something that is there. That's it. But the most important thing in any ecosystem, it's not the economic contribution per se. This is one of the consequences. The important thing is how healthy is the churning in the sense of regeneration. This is the idea behind churning, okay? How much it regenerates the economic activity, how much it regenerates the technologies being applied by businesses or being used by people, how much it regenerates processes. This churning capacity is what we should be paying attention to instead of growth. Growth is something there, okay? We shouldn't pay attention too much to that instead of the churning.
You've been talking about the measurement of not just entrepreneurial activity, but also entrepreneurial ecosystem. This analogy with the natural ecosystem was very illuminating. That we need to have like measurement metrics of different aspects. And as I learned from your work, primarily is that that's exactly what is happening in measuring entrepreneurial ecosystems, to collecting many data information about different aspects of these ecosystems. As doing research in this field, so what do you think that what might be those aspects of these entrepreneurial ecosystems which we still struggle to capture, to measure, to include reliably into these metrics which describes the shape of ecosystems?
It's examining ecosystem. Let's go a little bit broader. Basically, I think there are two approaches. And one approach that says that all the ecosystems are different. We need case study approaches to study them. So independently, we have to approach, and we have to develop independent policies for them, tools and others. Yeah. So there is no general type of thing. The other approach that we follow, that's basically, let's try to make a little bit, not under microscope, that will be different, but sometimes taking a bird eye view, yeah? And finding some kind of common things, what are within that one. All of this kind of ecosystem needs some kind of finance. But what kind of finance will be, what will be the composition of, I don't know, angel financing, venture capital loan, that will vary, yeah? We need human capital, yeah? What will be the composition of human capital, the engineers, the humanities, and all the others, at what level? That will vary again. Yeah, so and we can go even further, going about the infrastructure and everything like this one. So trying to measure this one, that's basically, so what we came out, that is cannot be with one indicator. We need a complex approach, and that is what is the so-called indices, or what we professionally say composite indicator approach. Yeah, so we are trying to measure on the indicator level and then aggregating them. What is important here, not is the one number that we're getting out of the end, yeah, that they does say about something like what is your average grade, yeah, but we don't know how good you are in math or physics or grammar or whatever it is. It just gives you some kind of average information about you, yeah. So this kind of approach is rather what I could see. It's something like a measurement tool, yeah. So it's a measurement tool, an examination tool. We do not provide something like panacea, yeah. So not a general pill that will cure all of these diseases and others. We provide a tool to be able to examine this kind of ecosystems, and as a role of the researchers to develop and then examine further how could we optimize this one. What is also important here, and that's a bad news for the politicians, that in this ecosystem policy, and the politicians are just only one element of the ecosystem. My personal view that politicians can harm more than help to the ecosystem. So it's rather to let the ecosystem work as they own if you don't know how and what will be the effect, what you are doing. Yeah, so that's my personal view. Maybe politicians have different view because they feel always that they have to do something. But sometimes there are more harm than the positive effects they do. Even externality effects.
Even externalities. No, but I agree. I mean, we need both the eagle-eye view approach and the microscopic approach. This is true. Back to the metaphor, to the natural ecosystem, there is an issue. Usually, we observe the natural ecosystem and then try to support those things that are spontaneously happening there, and try to only help to happen faster or more accelerated or to a greater extent. Interestingly, in the artificial ecosystem where we live in, that we call it sometimes city, we don't do that. We do the opposite. We just think, oh, this is missing. We do that. No, this is the wrong thing. And this is what I also, when I start making friends, this is the wrong approach. If you see that something is missing, it's maybe because it should be missing. First place. The other thing is that many policymakers have this kind of obsession with the numbers. There is an obsession. It's not a race. It's not a race where the highest score is the most important thing. No, wrong. This is wrong. When we build these composite indicators, is usually to understand, to summarize different effects, but the configuration is what counts. I mean, if you have, hypothetically speaking, 5 elements in that ecosystem that are being measured through a common composite indicator, the final outcome, the very single number, is totally useless if you don't pay attention to the differences between the 5 elements that are included in that single number. Okay, maybe you have 3 fantastic scores in 3 elements, and the other 2 are basically terribly low and damaging the others, or hiding negative externalities. Okay, so seemingly you may have a fantastic score, but you have two elements that are destroying value in the economy. It's like runners, no? Usually runners suffering from heart problems, no? Heart conditions. They run too much. This is the idea, okay? So when you run too much, after 20, 30 years, you need to start checking your heart because you may have some heart conditions. Well, here is the same. Maybe you're trying to go faster than necessary and you start suffering. In the natural ecosystem, we pay attention to important things that are happening and try to boost them. In the fabricated ecosystem, we don't do that. That is a terrible mistake, a policy mistake. These tools, especially now that we are in the digital wave, usually ignore something that is also, I think, is partially our fault as academics. In the 20th century, ecosystems, were geographically bounded. In the digital era where we live now, ecosystems, regardless the country, the territory, are geographically boundaryless. They are unbounded. At the moment we start understanding that even what is happening in Austria, in the case of Hungary, or in Romania, in the case of Hungary, are impacting Hungary, then we can start talking seriously. Okay? Keeping an ecosystem healthy is expensive. And keeping the well-being state is also expensive. But now it's boundaryless. Once we understand this very simple concept, we can go to the last part of the analysis. It usually starts with very simple relationships. It's like in physics, no? In physics, you have these power laws that explain tremendously complex phenomena using very simple relationships. Well, this is also part of our job with these measurements that we create with composite indicators. Try to present a very simple relationship to explain tremendously complex phenomena. Okay, and this is also an aspect that is usually sidelined by policymakers and politicians in general. Okay, when they remember that it all starts with a very simple relationship that we need to start digging to see what's in there, then we can understand the true definition of tailor-made policy. That is, this is the natural path to follow if we really want to create impactful policy instead of just copycatting. No, what are those guys doing? This replicative approach, and this is why this replicative approach is usually misleading. You can have, it's like checking two different woods, two different forests. You have the forest, okay, the wilderness, but you don't see the species living in that forest. So maybe they look the same from an eagle eye view, and you see green, fantastic, beautiful woods. Yeah, but one has one type of species, the other has a different type of species, and they don't necessarily compete, but they have different needs. Maybe one forest needs much more water than the other, or maybe the other needs more mammals or more insects. Who knows? Well, we are in the same position. This is why it's so important to understand that the composite indicator helps. Once you understand that the number is not important, what counts is the configuration of the elements that are part of that composite indicator.
We are getting back to tailor-made policies over and over again. So I think this is
it's a recurrent topic. It's a pervasive job.
Of this discussion. I would like to keep the topic here a little bit, but shift the perspective. So now everyone is talking about digitalization and most importantly, artificial intelligence. So I guess that it's also very interesting and important to understand how these digital technology as new development in the tech are affecting entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ecosystem. So this diversity, the opportunities, and maybe the threats that are there for entrepreneurs and the functioning of entrepreneurial ecosystems. I know that's a complex question, but we are talking about a complex system.
Yeah, that's something like the new hot topic in entrepreneurship, and working for Telefonica in something like in the 2010s. We used the classical entrepreneurship ecosystem concept, and what we learned from this project, that was very important, that how important is the digitalization. And that was before the artificial intelligence arrived there. Yeah, so that was on the verge, but not they haven't arrived yet. So, and we did understand that basically what we need, this kind of classical, as Esteban told us, a closed economic ecosystem, is not appropriate to examine digitalization. Digitalization is not just one technology that affects everything. So basically, that was the reason why we moved to a different concept, and that's the digital entrepreneurship ecosystem. And one of these characteristics is this kind of boundaryless type of thing. Yeah, so it's classical ecosystem were closed ecosystems. Yeah, it's like a zoo. Yeah, so it's you can create your own zoo, but you can prevent others to come here. But here it's yeah, but here if you develop an infrastructure and your entrepreneurs are not capturing the possibilities of this kind of change demand and others, then there are from other countries are jump right on the project. Yeah, so it's right on the issue. So that was the other thing. So it's a fundamentally changed entrepreneurship. And the other, but that is not really known, that so for a long time entrepreneurship were viewed something like solo heroes, yeah? But here is something like now, but what we can see is entrepreneurship is rather a group activity, yeah? So even Elon Musk, if you check out this kind of Elon Musk, Zuckerberg and others, all have teams behind that one. So it's not one person, but a group of persons with diverse knowledge and skills that come together to be able to deal with this kind of thing. And sometimes the entrepreneurial process even goes beyond the firm boundaries. Yeah, so it's one guy is working in Australia, the other is working US, the third is working I don't know, in Denmark somewhere or in Greenland, whatever it is. So it's like this kind of digital works makes it possible to do that. So that was the reason why we moved toward this kind of thing. How artificial intelligence changed? That's a big question, and what we know that has arrived. Yeah, so it's not something like knocking on the door. It's not in the kitchen. That is in all of the flats, in all parts of our apartment or house. Yeah, so but we don't really exploit its possibilities. Yeah, so we know that this has unlimited possibilities, but the events that or the examples are relatively rare as compared to the potential usability. And one of this, that's even artificial intelligence is becoming an agent, an entrepreneur by itself. There were some kind of examinations how to run a business with AI that were devastating effects. But that was the first try. And 2 years from now, I guess there will be some times that maybe you don't even realize, but you are doing business with an artificial intelligence, yeah, so it by itself. So that's what changed, and that's formed us to create this kind of new index. And what we can see with this newly created index, that this kind of digital entrepreneurship ecosystem is fastly going, something like 4 to 5% in a year. That's enormous, yeah? It's a compound rate, so it's something like that we have never seen in the classical type of ecosystem. There was something like relatively balanced and relatively small changes.
There are two things about AI and its role in the economy. The first thing has to do with the attributions we give to this technology. The technology is true, it's just arriving. But right now, what we know is that people are making an inefficient use of this technology. Basically, instead of asking the technology how to improve a product, like this table or any element in this room, we're asking the technology how to fry an egg, okay? And we believe that this is efficient, and obviously it is not efficient. We are in a factory, and instead of asking how to improve our production process, we still ask how to get the cheapest donuts to keep the workers happy, okay? So this is terrible. This is terrible because it's an underutilization of the technology. We have a tremendously powerful technology with incredible potential that is being used to fry eggs or to get cheap donuts, okay? So it's terrible. Yeah, it's true. People are using the technology, and this is because we falsely attributing the technology attributes or properties that it doesn't have. We shouldn't forget, this AI is basically a smart version of a chatbot, Okay, it's a smart version of a chatbot with certain capacities designed by humans, and it has two basic functions: augmenting our capabilities, that will be smart, or replacing them. Okay, in the augmentation automation divide, maybe there is a point in that we identify tasks that can be automated because it's more efficient, or tasks that should be augmented because it's more efficient. And this is the part of the analysis that, let's say, the overwhelming majority of the people are not making. Okay, so the impact of the AI technology is has a lot of potential, but it's still under-realized because it's too short. I mean, we just have too little time with the technology, and people are still experimenting. That is still experimenting, and that's fine. I mean, we need to learn how to use it, no? So experimentation is good, but at some point we need to go beyond the fried egg and the chip donut and start thinking on serious stuff. For example, product ideation, product development, process development, important things that can really impact the overall economic system or the overall economic production system. Okay. And the second thing that is important with this technology is that in the 20th century, or at least till 15, 20 years ago, everybody was worried about keeping a status quo. That was important, no? Because for welfare purposes, for well-being purposes, all these things. Since 2015, 2016, something like that, right before the pandemic. One thing we know in the economic system: change is the only constant. Now we are in an era where change is the only constant, and these technologies, AI, is also part of that change. Change is the only constant, and there is a problem. People are exposed to what I call the temptation of algorithmic delegation. And that is very dangerous because people are automatically delegating many tasks without considering the possibility that those tasks shouldn't be delegated because it's going to produce inefficient outcomes. In any way, dealing with suppliers, dealing with customers, dealing with other co-workers or branches of the same corporation, or maybe we're playing in the stock market and we are inefficiently delegating to an AI investment decisions. Many examples can be put on the table. Entrepreneurial examples or more corporate examples. In this case, it's not really relevant. What is relevant is that the technology is still, or the use of the technology is still a work in progress. And we will see the cost and obviously the benefits in the future, but the cost will also be measured, reported, observed, perceived in the future. For entrepreneurship is challenging because many entrepreneurs are going digital. Fantastic, I agree. The technology should be used, should be exploited. The problem is nobody's telling these people how to use that technology. And that is something that is missing in the ecosystem, okay? It's like when a small bird or a big bird, an eagle, gives birth to 3 small eagles, and the mommy eagle forgets to teach these small eagles, these baby eagles, to fly. Obviously, at some point they will just fell off the nest, because that learning curve never occur. The species is in danger. Here is the same. Entrepreneurs are never going to be in danger, but the way the entrepreneurs capitalize on technologies, they are at risk of becoming handicapped, technological handicap. And this is something that we should really pay attention. Efficient exploitation of technology is what we still need to learn in this very, very short period of time, actually, because the technology is true, László. I mean, it's evolving very rapidly, and we still don't understand what will be the dominant technology 5 years ahead. And that is something very important that we should start asking ourselves.
The most important bottleneck in this kind of digital technology is the human part.
Yeah.
That's that we know. Yeah. So it's
we are again.
How can we exploit
this is the augmentation. This is the augmentation side of the story. It's not here to
one good business right now is how to ask a good question from AI. Yeah. So it's
I've seen people.
That's it's a very important thing, and
I've seen-
that's that we have to learn, I think.
I've
first.
seen
And
people paying thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
as much as 3,000, to learn how to write prompts.
Yeah.
To AI chatbots.
That's a new. That's
a new business.
programming. That's a new programming. Yeah, but
Yeah.
we don't code now, but
Yeah.
we have to learn how to ask.
Talk
But
to a
here is
chat.
an entrepreneur ecosystem which then jumps on this issue, and an efficient one will jump on this issue and
Yeah.
create the businesses which teaches. right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
And then the entrepreneur ecosystem will bring the results
Yeah.
because.
But it's
others
like
are
in the
coming.
natural,
Hopefully.
but it's
Hopefully,
like in the natural ecosystem, no? When you are in the savannah or in Australia and you have a new species
Coming.
totally alien to the ecosystem that is infiltrating in this ecosystem, and it's a totally new species. Obviously, incumbent species, they need to learn how to deal with this species just in case it doesn't eat me. Okay. Just to make sure that I will live tomorrow. It's the same here. This technology, in a very positive way, because we should think that this technology is good. Technology is good and should be used, should be exploited, but it's just here. And it's infiltrating in every single aspect of our life, economic life, personal life, everything. And we still don't know where to put it, how to use it, and when to use it, and for what purpose. And this is the more or less the human part. I mean, it's about augmentation. At the moment we start over-delegating tasks to these technologies, we will not be only losing this human side, but we'll also be losing efficiency, because going back from those decisions, technological driven decisions, can be more costly than going back from human-made decisions. Yeah, we can rectify at some point. Technology doesn't, because technology thinks it's always right. This is the problem.
Okay.
So as a conclusion, I think that we can put down what both of you mentioned, that what remains is with us as a constant is change, and I think that this is more true than ever. And what I also learned from this discussion is that looking on natural ecosystems can have a lot of illuminating ideas to understand how entrepreneurial ecosystems are functioning and working. So Esteban and László, thank you very much for
Thank you,
being with us today, and for
Thank
the
you.
nice talk, and also for the listeners and the viewers to being with us today.